The best camera is the one you have. You don't need fancy gear. You have to make it work with what you have. Get crafty, learn the basics, get the best stuff you can get, and if it's your goddamn phone, that's fine too. I started out with this camera here. Learn, grow, and that's basically what all this is about. Sorry for the rant, but I really want you to create, and so I'm gonna stop talking right now. Alright, so now let's talk about shutter speed. So when you take a photograph with your camera, you have a shutter inside in front of the sensor that opens up every single time you take a picture. And the time that this shutter is open determines how much light gets into the sensor and therefore how bright or how well the picture is exposed. And therefore the shutter kind of determines how bright the exposure will be in the final picture you take. A longer exposure means a brighter picture and a shorter exposure means a darker picture. In videography though, there's an electronic shutter simulating this whole process. But really the important thing to remember here is, how does shutter speed actually influence your image, your exposure? What exactly do you have to do to get a good picture? Generally, a faster shutter speed means a darker picture, and a slower shutter speed means a brighter picture. Like I said before, if the shutter is opening and closing very fast, that means there's less time to get exposure onto the sensor, which obviously creates a darker image. And if you have the sensor open and exposed to the light for a longer time, then it creates a brighter image. But like in ISO and aperture, there's a few more things to remember than just the relation between the number and the exposure. So with shutter speed, there's actually one important rule to remember, and that's the 180-degree shutter rule. And that sounds kind of confusing or complicated, but what it actually just means is you want the shutter speed to be double the value of your frame rate. Okay, so let's break that down. What does that mean? If you record at the standard frame rate of 24 frames per second, you would want your shutter speed to be at least 1/48, usually it's 1/50, to match that, to create the most natural looking image and the most natural looking motion for our human eyes. If you record at 60 frames per second, your shutter speed should be at least at 1/120. And if you record 120 frames per second, 1/240th of a second. And like I said, that way you create motion that looks most natural to our eyes and therefore create a pleasing picture. And that's exactly also kind of the limit of the shutter speed, because you might be tempted, especially when you film in very bright situations outside. Imagine you are outside, the sun is shining, you are already ISO 100, which is the lowest light sensitivity. You have your aperture at a level where you want it to have it, because you want to have the shallow depth of field, so you're filming at something like whatever, f2.8, which is quite open and leaves in a lot of light, which you need to create the shallow depth of field. But then the picture will be very, very bright because of all the sunlight available, and then it might be tempting to use your shutter speed and crank it up all to like 1/800 or something while you're filming in 24 frames per second. So the actual correct way to do it would be 1/50, and you use 1/800, which then might correct the exposure to a level that's actually okay. So the problem with this, and why you shouldn't do this, is that it would just create motion that is completely unnatural. If you film something in 24 frames per second and you use the correct shutter speed, you will see something that is called motion blur. Because if you look right now, when I move my hand really fast, you see the blurriness here, right? It kind of appears that there's more than one hand because it's so fast that, you know, the picture is not fast enough to keep up with the movement of the hand. That is also what makes it look natural, because our eyes function at 24 frames per second, so to speak, as well. So in real life, we also see motion blur. When we see a car passing, we don't see it completely perfectly every single second. We have a motion blur in there. So what happens if you film at 24 frames per second, but you have a shutter speed that is way higher than 1/50th, you will lose that motion blur. So you technically could still film, and it's probably okay for some situations, but it's kind of like bad technique and bad style, and it will definitely create a worse looking image just for the sake of this motion blur that's missing. So in some situations, like I said, it might be okay. It might actually be even helpful if you want something to look really fast and kind of hectic maybe, but that should always be a stylistic decision that you make intentionally and not just because the situation is so bright and you don't know what else to do. So remember, the shutter speed basically you shouldn't really touch because it just should always be double the amount of the actual frame rate that you're filming. So I do want to say though, just out of fairness, that some people do ignore this rule and some people actually do use that trick of just cranking up the shutter to be fast and adjust to a situation. That might make sense in some situations. For example, if you're out and kind of like run and gun shooting, maybe you're vlogging or you're filming someone that is outside and the scene is changing fast, maybe in a documentary style work that you're doing, and you might have to adjust to a light change very fastly, and you cannot use ND filters. ND filters kind of make the image darker, which then enables you to use the normal shutter speed. If you don't have that and you have to adjust to the situation very fastly, and it's the decision between no picture and a imperfect picture, obviously you should use the shutter speed. So it's good to know that when you crank it up, and by cranking up I mean when you raise the value of the shutter speed, if you make it faster, 1/800, 1/1000, whatever, you can use that to make the picture less bright, you can make it darker, but it will suffer in image quality, especially in the motion. Be aware of that. Only do it if you really have to, and if you can help it, then use the other tools available in your toolkit to create a pleasing and good looking image. So now quickly, I just want to mention again what is actually an ND filter. So there are certain filters and things you can screw on your lens, in front of the lens, to change the picture, or to change the light that enters the lens, right? And ND filters are called neutral density filters, and what they basically do is they can make the image darker. They can like block parts of the light that enters the lens and therefore enable you to shoot at something like 24 frames per second at 1/50 shutter speed at a low aperture, even like 1.4 or 1.8, even if it's extremely bright outside, because it dampens down the light entrance and therefore enables you to, keep the shutter speed, keep the aperture, and keep the exposure exactly where you want it to be, and still have a great looking image and not totally overexposed. So there you go. Those are the 3 elements of light that we have at our disposal to change the picture to the way we like it. I hope it helps you and gives you a little overview when you need it.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest videos.